What's up, everybody? Recently, Wallet Hub came out with a study that ranks Maryland the 5th happiest state in the country for 2024. It actually came down 2 notches from last year, and I think I know why. So today, we're not going to talk about how great Maryland is, although I love this state, but instead, we're going to talk about the things that are not so great about living in Maryland. Because let's face it, there are good and bad things about every state. So today, we're going to the dark side. This way, if you are thinking about moving here, you'll have the whole picture. So you can make the best decision if Maryland is for you or not. So let's dive right in. Since we're in an election year, let's start with politics because it's not so simple with Maryland. Yes, Maryland has been a long-standing Democratic state. However, this can vary widely depending on where you live in Maryland. In fact, we had a Republican governor for a while, Larry Hogan, and now we have a Democratic one, Wes Moore. Basically, in general, Baltimore and anywhere in the Washington, D.C. metro area will tend to be liberal. So that includes Montgomery County, PG County, Howard County, and Frederick. Rural Maryland, such as Carroll and Hartford, as well as the Western Mountains and the Eastern Shore, are really very conservative. Take a look at this map of the 2020 election. Most of the counties are conservative, and they really feel that way. There is quite a distinction between the liberal parts of Maryland and the conservative parts of Maryland. If you're watching this video and you live in one of the more conservative counties in Maryland, definitely comment below so everybody out there believes me. The reason why Maryland tends to vote liberal is only because the most populous counties lean that way, not necessarily because the whole state feels that way. And this isn't new for Maryland. Even back in the day, Maryland was divided. Most people think that Maryland is technically a southern state, but in reality, it was always considered a border state, straddling between the South and the North. And if my history is correct, and please feel free to correct me if it isn't, I'm okay with that, the South tried to take over Maryland by invading it, but Maryland remained in the Union and did not secede to join the Confederacy. All this to say is that Maryland was and still is very, very diverse when it comes to politics. Remember, we're a really small state. I like to say we're the 42nd biggest state or the 8th smallest. So to have such a division between conservative versus liberal in such a small state, it's pretty unique. And it can be really startling depending on which side you lean towards when you come to Maryland. You think it's one way and you discover it's another. So if you're thinking about moving here and assume Maryland is liberal because we are so close to DC and you don't want that, just be aware there are many places within our little state that are proudly conservative. And if you do want a more liberal vibe, just stick close to DC. Just don't be surprised if you travel outside the area, but still in Maryland, and see a lot of conservative signs out in the yards. In these decisive times, it can be a little startling to both sides. I think the U.S. Senate will be very telling for Maryland to fill Democrat Ben Cardin's seat. Hogan, a Republican, is running against the endorsed Democrat, also Brooks. Who do you guys think is going to win? I did a video last year titled What They Don't Tell You About Living in Maryland. One of my viewers, at Mick8669, commented on it and wrote this: "My wife and I have lived in Maryland for most of our lives. Maryland is a heavily liberal state. However, we live in a very conservative county." Another viewer, at DO5WTT, wrote, "Maryland may be politically diverse, but it's still one of the top 3 or 5 most liberal states in the country. It's roughly 2/3 Democrats and 1/3 Republican. Republicans like Governor Hogan or Elrick win because they're more centrist than conservative. The thing is, I like the diversity of our little state. I think it really reflects our country. They don't call Maryland Little America for nothing. You can literally find every culture right here in this little state. But with that diversity does come divisiveness. So it can feel a little hostile depending on where you are in the state and where you lean either left or right. So I just want to put that out there so you all are aware of it. Let's move on. Another thing that you really need to know about Maryland is that it is super expensive. U.S. News and World Report declared Maryland the 2nd richest state in the whole country. Now, I don't know if that's true, but I can tell you it costs a lot to live here, especially in the counties right outside of DC, like Montgomery and Howard County. Once again, there is a huge difference between things like housing, which is your biggest expense, in the counties that are close to DC and the more rural counties that are farther away. You may notice I talk in counties when it comes to Maryland because that's kind of what we do here. If you ask somebody where they're from within Maryland, we'll tell you what county we're from. So it's just something you should know if you're thinking about moving here. So let me show you what I mean. If you look up the cost of living for Maryland, it doesn't look so bad. Look at bestplace.net and they give Maryland a score of 118 compared to the national average of 100. They say a typical home costs $388,100 $100, which is 14.8% more expensive than the national average of $338 $100, or a score of 124 compared to the US average of 100. Now look at Montgomery County. They gave Montgomery County a score of 138.5 compared to the US average of 100. And for housing, they gave Montgomery County a score of 192 compared to the US average of 100 and the Maryland score of 124. Let's plug in Allegheny County. Check this out. They gave Allegheny County a score of 73.2 compared to the US average of 100, and for housing, a score of 35.1 compared to the US average of 100, Maryland 124, and Montgomery County 192. So you can see that not only is Maryland politically diverse, but the cost of living ranges dramatically throughout our little states. Our property taxes are around 1%, but that too depends on which county you live in and possibly which city you live in within that county. Some places like the city of Rockville and the city of Gaithersburg, for example, have an additional tax on top of the Montgomery County tax. So it's just something to be aware of. WalletHub ranks Maryland's property taxes right in the middle, 31st out of 50. The bottom line is, if you are thinking about moving here, just know you have a wide range of choices depending on your preferences and your situation. But also be mindful that not everybody within our little state is like-minded, because they're not. And you may want to visit the county that you're thinking about just to make sure it's the right vibe for you. While we're on the subject of diversity, I think that Maryland is one of the few states that has all the different terrains, except the desert. We have the ocean, the mountains, the plains, the plateaus, the rivers, and the bays. One of my viewers at Calzivar2895 wrote, "Lived in Maryland my whole life. We have every season. We have the bay and the ocean, farmland, cities, forests, mountains, smaller cities, towns. We've got it all. I absolutely love it here, but the only con is that it's getting pretty expensive." We also have a really interesting history, but that's for another video. The next thing that we got to talk about here in Maryland is that there are traffic cameras everywhere. They really, really want your money here. And maybe that's why Maryland is the second richest state in the country, because they put traffic cameras everywhere for everything. And now, thanks to one of my viewers at John Stewart/LX5MD, I've been made aware that, to quote him, the state government just passed legislation to allow certain counties to install cameras to ticket loud exhaust on cars. I mean, that sounds crazy to me. Noise abatement cameras? I wonder if they have them in California. I don't remember when I lived there, but it sounds like something they would have there. And now they're gonna have them here in Maryland. Anyway, all jokes aside, I'm really serious that if you are coming to visit here or you're planning on moving here, use Waze or some other systems that can help you detect where those cameras are, because otherwise you're gonna go home and you're gonna get one of those tickets in the mail, and they are really, really expensive. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the traffic here. It's really bad, especially in the counties next to DC. We have over 6 million people living in a really small state. Just in Montgomery County, PG County, Howard County, and Baltimore County, there goes over half of the population. Add in Baltimore City and Anne Arundel County, and you can see they all border each other. We have over 4.5 million of the 6 just living in this area. So you can imagine how crowded it gets, and the traffic reflects that. A lot of people move here to work in DC, so just be aware of your commute. Don't go by the distance, by the amount of miles it takes you to get to work, because it could be a very short distance and yet take you a really long time to get there. So what I do, because I'm always traveling within Maryland and DC and Virginia, is I happen to use Waze. I know that some of my colleagues use Google Maps, because they will tell you about the different traffic situations. You can gauge on how long it will actually take you to drive there. Because trust me when I say this, depending on the time of day and where you're going, your commute, it can be brutal. There's a couple more things you need to know about Maryland. Right now, I'm recording this in July, and it is 98 degrees out there, but feels like 107. And that's not me saying it. That's the weather people. They tell us what it feels like to warn us, because it is so hot and humid here, it's hard to be outside. So what do we do about it? Well, what I do is I head to the beach. I actually like the Delaware beaches the best, but a lot of people will go to either the Maryland beaches, the Delaware beaches, the Bay. They just get out of town, because especially here in the suburbs, it's awful, at least to me. Don't get me wrong, it's not hot like Arizona. And if you like hot, humid summers, you may love it. But most people are surprised when they first move to Maryland in the summer just how how hot it actually gets. And as for crime in Maryland, this is where I think Maryland gets a bad rap or an unfair rap because it really varies widely depending on where you live in the state. So let's take a look and I'll explain. If you look up the state as a whole, bestplace.net give the state of Maryland a violent crime score of 27.5, which is higher than the national average of 22.7. But if you look up Montgomery County, for example, violent crime is a 15.3 compared to the US average of 22.7. By the way, crime is ranked on a scale of 1 to 100, 1 being the lowest and 100 being the highest. These are all numbers from bestplace.net, but you get the point. There is a vast difference in crime depending on where you live within the state of Maryland. I did a video, I think it was last year, with one of DC's finest about the best crime data websites. So if you are interested in crime statistics in DC, Maryland, or Virginia, definitely check that out next. And finally, it's really important that you know that we have a lot of deer here in Maryland, even right here, right outside of DC. And with deer come ticks, and with ticks come Lyme disease. Just in May, the Maryland Department of Health gave us a warning. Maryland Department of Health urges Marylanders to guard against tick-borne diseases. In 2022, more than 2,000 cases of Lyme disease were reported in the state, as Lyme disease is the most commonly reported tick-borne disease in Maryland. And yes, if you watch my videos, you know, we have snakes too. I see copperheads literally all the time here in Montgomery County when I go hiking on the Billy Goat Trail. In fact, on average, Maryland Poison Control Center receives 100 snake bite cases each year, about half of which are due to bites from venomous snakes, mostly copperhead bites. And they're here now in the summer with the heat and the humidity. So just be aware of it if you're gardening or you're hiking. At Dave's Ravens 47 wrote, "You brought us some things that I didn't really think about living in Maryland. The deer, ticks, and snakes part is so true. In fact, I did get Lyme disease. Also, the speed cameras are everywhere. I haven't seen one since moving away. I'm really sorry you got Lyme. People I know that have it say it's brutal. So just protect yourself if you're coming to Maryland or you live here when you go hiking, and always do a tick check after." Well, that's all I really have to say about the dark side of Maryland. Some other comments on last year's video, what they don't tell you about living in Maryland, are, at Brad Foster 8146 wrote, "Grew up in Hartford County and it was a great upbringing. I was always outside and hiking and swimming in the creek." At Eric Costner wrote, "I lived in Garrett County for most of my life. Here in Mountain, Maryland, we sometimes feel cut off from the rest of the state, but most of us still take pride in being one of Maryland's best kept secrets. We experience every bit of every season. Crime is low, traffic is almost non-existent, schools are good. There's lots to do outdoors from boating to hiking to snow skiing." Maybe I should check out Garrett County, that sounds pretty good. And at Doug Champion 8084 wrote, "I've been to every state aside from Alaska, having spent a considerable time in many. There are pros and cons to many places, but Maryland is great." So you can see, we've got just about everything here in our little state. I absolutely love it here. And if you are thinking about moving here, let's chat. My Calendly link is in the pinned comments. So set up an appointment, we'll do a Zoom, and we'll see if I can help you. That goes for DC, Maryland, Virginia, and actually anywhere in the country. I have access to the best agents all over the country. So if you want some help, I'm happy to find you one. Keep the comments coming. I love reading them. And if you enjoyed this video, you may want to check out some of the things you should know about living in DC next. Thanks for watching. I do appreciate it. Bye.